Hey, Mike, I see you have the newest Newsweek Special Edition. Any interesting things come out of this issue?
Yeah, it's in case you haven't seen it or heard about it. It's a special edition put out by Newsweek that is all about Bigfoot, and it says the science, sightings, and search for America's elusive legend. The world's top experts discuss new DNA techniques, migration and speech patterns, man or ape? Question mark. Introduction by survivor man Les Stroud. So Les Stroud is now at the top of the list of Bigfoot experts. He's been involved in it for a year? I don't know. But he's now the top of the list because of his fame as a survivor man. And he went out and looked for Bigfoot. So what I found most interesting in here, and there's a lot of stuff in here about hoaxing and this and that, and it's a pretty good general sort of a summary of the Bigfoot phenomena. And of course they had to pick certain people to feature and so on and so forth. And so here's Cliff Barrickman here, a nice guy, a friend, who of course is on Finding Bigfoot, and he's got attitudes about Bigfoot. He thinks it's purely biological and it's gigantopithecus. And like I said in my last talk, the paranormal has come up more frequently, mind speak and so on and so forth. But what I find most interesting here is the little notice about Bryan Sykes. Now, Bryan Sykes, here's another sort of Johnny-come-lately to the collateral hominid scene. He's a very famous scientist and probably the most famous scientist when it comes to DNA and human origins and so on and so forth. And he recently called out for some samples from the research community that he was tired of listening to cryptozoologists complain because real scientists weren't paying attention to their evidence. So he said, okay, bring me your best evidence for Sasquatch, and I will test it for DNA in my laboratory. Now, this was already taking place in Texas. Melba Ketchum had already been involved in doing this for several years when Mr. Sykes decided to jump into the fray. And we had high hopes. I know I personally had high hopes that this man would be an exemplary scientist, and he would really want to find out what's really going on here and get down to the nitty-gritty in trying to really test this, quote, myth. So he put out this cry for samples. Amongst the samples he was sent was a part of our tooth. As many of you probably know, and some of you don't, we have a tooth that was discovered here in the Santa Cruz Mountains that 7 dentists appraised as being very much like a human upper molar, but way too big. So we have an apparent giant primate tooth in an area where there are not supposed to be any giant primates. And so we were interested in having that tested, and this ended up, through a series of events, getting into the hands of Bryan Sykes, part of this tooth. Now, prior to that, I had also given over some of the tooth to Melba Ketchum for her tests in Texas. Now, Melba had like 111 samples or something like this, and so she had to vet that down to a sizable amount that they could deal with, and she made an arbitrary decision to discount and not test in the first round of testing for the paper that she was working on anything that was that could be considered as a fossil evidence. She wanted just the fresh stuff: hair, blood, urine, things like this. So she went ahead and did her testing and wrote it all up and came up to a conclusion that's been largely put down and criticized extensively by both sides of the community. I mean, by the Bigfoot believers as well as Bigfoot skeptics. Everybody agrees that Melba's paper was lousy and poorly done. Now, she, on the other hand, has a continuing project known as the Sasquatch Genome Project, where she's following through with her research and posting more and more information and letting people see how her paper was treated by the academic community, how it was put down in a knee-jerk reaction, how she was being vilified years before anything was ever published. People made their minds up ahead of time about her paper before they'd even seen it. And that's a fact. Whether or not her paper had any flaws in it or not, I'm not going to argue, because I'm not enough of a scientist to be able to speak to that. But I have read what other scientists have said, and there have been some who have said well, she did some decent work here and there, but not here and not there. Yeah, there were some genuine criticisms. She also invoked some biblical terminology when discussing this, which is a no-no to a scientist. You don't bring that in. So now Mr. Sykes, he also has committed a bit of a strange thing with his test, because he asked for samples and didn't specify, I just want hair. So he got lots of different kinds of samples, including hair. So he went ahead and tested the hair and ignored all the rest, which included the parts from our tooth. So the part of our tooth that was sent to Bryan is now in a collection in Switzerland in a museum that has to do with Bernard Wavellman's cryptozoology collection. So it's been sent to them for, I don't know if it's on display, but it's in an archive as some potential Bigfoot evidence, which maybe someday will be tested, or at least it's going to be part of the history of the subject, which is great. But I was hoping that Mr. Sykes would test our tooth. I was hoping that Melba would test the tooth. It would be great if they both tested parts of the tooth that they got and see if they even could come up with the same results, because I wouldn't be surprised if they could not do that. But what Mr. Sykes admitted in this little statement in the Newsweek, which is where we started this conversation, is that he was testing a new method that he had devised to identify animals from hair. And that was the actual reason that he called this test. He mentioned the cryptozoologists who were whining because no one would check their stuff. Yeah, okay, that was a cute thing to say and a nice front for the whole concept. But in reality, all they did was they took the hairs that they got and they did mitochondrial testing. And if you look at what Melba has to say, mitochondrial testing is going to turn out human most of the time when you're dealing with Bigfoot samples. And guess what? If you look at Bryan Sykes' results that he published of the animals that he tested, the hairs that he tested, I should say, one of them tested human from North America. Now, if you compare that then to Melba's results, she would say, well, wait a minute, you only tested the mitochondrial DNA. Now, if you go and you take that hair and you test the nuclear DNA, it might turn out to be an unknown, like what happened in my test. But did the two of them compare notes on that? Of course not. Are they both testing parts of the tooth that I supplied, which would prove to us that they can both come up with the same answer? No. They're each doing their separate little things, and they're each committing some, I think, scientific errors here, and that this stuff has not been properly vetted. If Bryan Sykes was doing a real test concerned with collateral hominids, he would have eliminated through microscopy the majority of the hairs that he went ahead and tested for DNA. Because you could do that by looking under a microscope, the majority of those bare hairs. So as a result, people are stating that Bryan Sykes with his project proved that the Yeti is a bear. No. He just proved that he didn't have any samples from any real Yetis or Sasquatches, except maybe that one that turned out human. And he didn't check the Y chromosome to see if that was human as well. So we don't know for sure that that was human or not. It could have been Bigfoot.